Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris here. One of my goals over the past couple of years has been to catch up on classic films that, for one reason or another, I just never saw, over the course of my life up until this point. So, one of those movies that I kept hearing about from some of my favorite directors, Steven Spielberg, Christopher Nolan, they constantly reference this as being sort of one of their main inspirations when it comes to their directorial style, just setting up scale and scope and all that sort of stuff, is Lawrence of Arabia. I finally picked that up on Blu-ray, sat down and watched it over the course of 2 days because it's, I think, 3 hours and 36 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that, something in that range. But I just didn't have time to watch it all in one sitting. So I watched maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours last night and then finished it today. Of course, it's one of those films that has that intermission in the middle. And so I wanted to talk just kind of about my thoughts with that, to see if it lives up to its reputation, to see if I think it's worth all of the sort of hype surrounding it, again, that I've heard from directors over a long period of time. So I didn't really know a whole lot about this movie before diving into it. I knew that it was long. I knew that it was considered sort of a historical epic. I don't know much about T.E. Lawrence as a person, so I didn't do any kind of biographical research or anything before I jumped into this. I would say that my World War One knowledge is decently okay. I'm more of a World War Two buff, if you want to use that term. So I think going into this, not having that context for, sort of Middle Eastern campaigns during World War One, what all of that entailed with the Turks and everything else, I think had I researched that a little more deeply going into it, it probably would have been helpful with processing sort of the storyline, because you don't really get a ton of context here other than some sort of baseline elements to kind of put things in motion for this British officer who is going into a certain region to hopefully, get these warring tribes to sort of work together to push away the Ottoman Empire and all of that kind of stuff. So I didn't have a ton of that context. I loosely kind of know the events of World War One in that region specifically. But I think it was such an interesting tale in the way that it unfolded that it did just enough to keep me hooked from a storytelling perspective. I will say, though, that I think that the storytelling piece of this, while it is good and it works, reasonably well throughout the 3.5 hour runtime, to me, that's not what makes this movie such a grand kind of epic masterpiece. To me, it is what I mentioned earlier at the start of this review, which is to say the scope and the scale. In terms of just widescreen vistas, landscapes, that kind of stuff, I don't know that I've ever seen a movie that comes close to what this achieves. So just for context, I watched this downstairs in our house. We have a really large television there that I got for movie viewing purposes. I think it's around an 80-inch TV, something like that. Put this on, turned out the lights, and oh my gosh, the sheer scope of everything on the screen, just the aridness of the desert, the landscapes, the sound, the music. I will say the score to this is fantastic. I've had it kind of on loop in my head over the past couple of days, having watched the movie. I think all of that is fantastic. The acting is great. Peter O'Toole as T.E. Lawrence. And I will say that's one of the things about this movie that I wasn't necessarily expecting. It ends up being a really in-depth character study. More, I would say it's even more so that than it is meant to be a geopolitical drama. I mean, it is that, but I think the character study and sort of the emotions of what this person, this real life person, went through and sort of all the things that he was involved with, to me, that's what makes this stand out. Sort of the horror of war, how he responds to that, how at one point he says something like he enjoyed it and how he's scared of what he's become, and how that transforms him. That piece of it to me was great, and I think that O'Toole does a really good job of conveying that sentiment in different moments in the film. I think that works super well. Alec Guinness is really good in this. I mean, I will say I think it's a little problematic having him play a prince, a Middle Eastern prince, as we see in this movie. I mean, Alec Guinness, of course, I know him most from Star Wars. That's one of my favorite franchises of all time. But I think he does a great job in this. I mean, I think he plays Prince Faisal, I believe it is, really well. I mean, he's just got sort of that stately, intelligent, wise way of sort of interacting with the other characters. Again, I think it is a little bit of a weird choice. I mean, he's a great actor, but you would want someone maybe who's got sort of the nationality background and all that to step into that type of role. But I would say in general, the casting here is excellent. It works super well. Overall, though, I would say from a sheer scope and scale point of view, that's what I most appreciate about this movie. I just think the directing is really good. I think the emotional punches that it manages to deliver at different points in the film is great. I will say, though, I've seen some people kind of comment on the length, 3.5 hours. I don't know that it's overlong necessarily, because I think back on it and I just don't know what I would cut. And one especially bold choice about this that I did not expect, in fact, I had to check to make sure my Blu-ray wasn't messed up or something. the movie begins with about 4 minutes of just a black screen and sort of this really sort of, it's not operatic, but this really sort of great orchestral score to kind of set the tone before it dives into the film itself. It does that at the intermission also, which makes a little more sense there, because if you're showing it in the theater, people need to get up, use the restroom, all that kind of stuff. But at first, yeah, I thought my Blu-ray was broken because I just had a black screen, but then I read, no, that's totally how it's supposed to begin. And again, one thing that I loved about this too, just from a directing point of view, are the transitional shots. And people have talked about this before, but the scene where Lawrence blows out a match and then it cuts to a sunrise in the desert and sort of sets the tone for everything that he's about to go through. Just amazing. Just super cool. And there are some kind of twisty-turny things in this that I was not expecting. You know, the moment where he rescues one of his fellow, I guess, soldiers or travelers, only to have that person essentially kind of turn on him and he has to execute him in order to maintain peace among these tribes to help them ultimately achieve their goal. That was kind of a cool twist that I didn't see coming. So yeah, I mean, just from the sheer scale of it, I don't know that I've seen anything ever quite like this. And of course, I've seen a ton of just sort of big dramas, big biographical types of movies, but this was definitely on another level. And I can see how it's influenced and impacted directors like Steven Spielberg. I mean, I saw this and I kept thinking about shots from Raiders of the Lost Ark and some of the other Indiana Jones movies. Even the ending credit of Last Crusade, their ending scene of that, where Indy and his dad are riding off into the sunset, you can see some direct parallels to Lawrence of Arabia and how that impacted that. It even made me think of Prometheus and how the android David is sort of frequently referencing Lawrence's character and sort of modeling his behavior on that, and some of the quotes that were there in that film that are drawn from this. So clearly a hugely sort of inspirational movie for a lot of filmmakers. So, you know, in terms of how I would rate it overall, like, you know, yeah, obviously I understand why it is the movie that it is in terms of being sort of one of those classic films that influences directors. You know, will I watch it again? Probably. I mean, I think it's one of those movies that I could put on every couple of years and just appreciate the sheer grandeur of it. You know, just, again, the scope and the scale of everything is almost kind of overwhelming, especially when you're watching it on a really big screen like I was. Obviously not a movie theater screen, but a big TV screen. It's just amazing to see. So yeah, I really loved it a lot. You know, in my opinion, I don't know that I would say it's a perfect movie. I think a little more of the historical context could have been helpful. I mean, part of that's on me just not being probably as well educated as I should have been about what was going on in that region during World War One. I think a little more context for that maybe could have been helpful, but at the same time, I wouldn't want the movie to be any longer. So that's kind of a weird preferential type of thing based on each viewer, I would say. So anyway, if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Are there some things here that I overlooked that you would comment on? Do you disagree with me on anything? Just let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks so much for watching.